Welcome here at Seismic Radio, and welcome to our Christmas presentation here. Real Christmas. What is Christmas all about? We've got a picture here. We've got the presents. We've got Santa Claus. We've got the stockings, the Christmas tree, ice and snow, and a very cozy period in the year. Now, what is special about Christmas? One thing you may know, obviously, it's a celebration supposed to be about Jesus, all about Jesus. Is it really though? And that's what we are going to look at in this presentation. Is it all about Jesus? What is it all about? Where does it come from? Does it come from the Bible? Do we find Christmas in the Bible? Do we find the word Christmas in the Bible? And also, what are we actually celebrating? What's happening around about Christmas time? Now, when we look at Christmas, the big question is, how Christian is Christmas really? And one thing we can say for certain, we can say this in the West, that Christmas is probably the biggest festival within Christianity. So if you compare it to Easter, Pentecost, which are other festivals, quite significant really from a biblical point of view, we can say safely that Christmas is the biggest festival. There's, Easter, yes, you can see a little bit in the shops, some chocolate rabbits are sold and things like that. Is it really biblical when we talk about Easter bunnies? But it's a different question. We're not going to look at this at the moment. So we can say without any doubt that at least within Western Christianity, within the Western Hemisphere, Christmas is by far the biggest Christian festival. I would say it's been hijacked by the secular world. We've got Santa. A big question is, where does Santa come from? What has Santa got to do with the Bible? Do we find Santa in the Bible? Sometimes when I look at kids and they get really excited about Santa and, think that he's a real figure, and that he actually comes, around, bringing gifts and things like that. And it's maybe a nice little fairy tale, and it's a nice little gesture to let the imagination of kids run wild. But who is Santa really? Where does it all come from? We're going to look at this later as well. We've got the whole commercialism, around Christmas. I find it always interesting when just around about January, you get the Christmas sales, whether they were up or down compared to the last year. And they use it as an indicator of how well the economy is doing. So it's all about people buying themselves crazy around about Christmas time. Then we've got the Christmas cards as well, which we've got this cult where everybody has to wish everybody Merry Christmas. And sometimes there's a bit of a contest, who's got the most cards. And to be fair, when I look at this gesture, it's nice, to remember people, to let people know that we still think of you and so on. But it's just about Christmas. And again, is it a big Christian festival? What did the first Christians do in the first 300 years? Did they celebrate it? And we're going to look at all this in a minute. And then we've got the Christian perspective, of course, of Christmas. And very often, I remember when I was a scout and I was maybe about 8-9 years old, I was asked, what is Christmas all about? And I wanted to be a good boy, and I said, it's all about Jesus. Jesus has come into the world, and it's really important, and that's what we celebrate, that's what we think about, thinking that is the right answer. And I was told off, no, it's wrong, you're getting it all wrong. It's all about presents. That's what it's all about. And I thought, is it? And at the time, and obviously I was excited about the presents I was about to get, but I knew, even as a child, that it wasn't really what it was supposed to be about. Yeah. So it's sometimes interesting. But anyway, there's a Christian perspective as well, and we're going to look at the Christian perspective in a minute. And it's just like 5-6 entries in the Scripture, which point directly to the spirit of Christmas. And there's surely something to be celebrated about, but, whether the date is correct is a different question. We're going to look at this in a moment as well. Is it really the 25th of December that Christ was born, or is it more likely that he was born at some other time? A range of events told to us about his birth. There are quite a few in the Bible, as I said, about half a dozen, and we're going to look at those in a minute. Christmas versus Easter. Now, the first Christians didn't celebrate Christmas at all. So in the first 300 years of Christianity, Christmas just didn't exist. Christians weren't celebrating it. Instead, they were celebrating the Passover, or Easter. Again, Easter, we have to look at where the whole thing of Easter comes from, which is not really the same as a Passover. But Christians were celebrating at that particular time. And why? Because at Passover, the Jews celebrated the freedom out of Egypt. Liberated from Egyptian slavery. The Passover lamb was slaughtered. The blood was put at the doorpost, and the firstborns were saved, were rescued, and it began for them the great exodus out of slavery. From a Christian perspective, Jesus died just before the Passover, and the Passover came, and and for us, it's a celebration that we have left the land of sin and we went into the kingdom of God, into the kingdom of heaven. Yeah, so that's really the celebration we have got with the Passover, and so it's always been the biggest festival. I was quite impressed when I was in the Ukraine, and over there you've got a lot of Orthodox Christians, and they really celebrate Easter. It's like a really big thing for them. And so the common phrase when you meet somebody on the street, and I don't even try to get it together in Russian, but translated it means Christ is risen. That's a greeting everybody has. And then the answer is He is risen indeed. Yeah. So quite a big thing. Lots of celebrations, lots of church activities and so on. Round about Easter time in the Ukraine, Christmas as well. I mean, it is celebrated, but I got the impression that maybe Easter was maybe sort of a little bit more important than Christmas. I don't know. Yeah, you tell me if you come from Eastern Europe, especially from the Orthodox realm of the church, whether that is true or not. Now, Christmas is a product of the 4th century, and what we find is that there were a lot of pagan feasts, about 3 pagan feasts around about this time of Christmas. Obviously, we've got the solstice, which means we've got the shortest day of the year, around about 21st of December, and then obviously we had the Julian calendar, which means that things were shifting about a bit, so it might have been around about the 25th anyway. So we had the solstice, so we had the shortest day of the year at that time, and with the solstice, the days became longer, and so it was quite sort of an ominous time, that the days become shorter and shorter and shorter, and then suddenly, the Earth goes around the sun, and suddenly they become longer again, and it's a big thing. So there were a lot of pagan festivals around about this time, and some of them, I mean, maybe legitimately, Christians thought to make Christianity more acceptable to some of the pagan believers or people with a pagan background, since Christianity became the state religion, and a lot of people sort of joined the club who weren't really Christians, not in their hearts. And but then again, you could make the argument, the light of the world has come into the world, and you might draw the parallel between the sun becoming stronger and stronger, days becoming longer and longer, the light returning, and that this might be the reason that Christians went along with it, and that they chose Christmas to be around about this time. But it wasn't celebrated up till about the 4th century. It's quite interesting as well. So up to then, it was just really Easter or the Passover time, which was celebrated. Yeah, Easter was a big festival, the resurrection of Christ, Jesus conquering death. That was a really important thing. So the birth of Christ was obviously important, and we've got reference of it in the scripture. But the big, pivotal point within Christianity really is Easter. Possibly Pentecost as well, but it's Easter. As I mentioned before, Orthodox Christians still celebrate Easter as a bigger festival. And again, I gladly stand corrected on this. It's just a personal, very subjective experience I've had in the Ukraine. I've been there at Christmas time. I've been there at Easter time. And I've found that Easter was much more vibrant. There was a lot more stuff happening around about Easter time. Easter, again, is, Christians, they didn't like the whole Jewish customs. They separated from Judaism quite early. And so instead of Passover, we had Easter, and Easter was then calculated using a different calendar, using the Julian calendar, which is based on a solar year, rather than the Jewish calendar, based on a lunar year. So all slightly different, really. Also, the origins of Easter, again, we're not going to cover this in this talk, but they are quite pagan as well. There are a lot of pagan origins. Even the name Easter has got nothing to do with Christianity. There's no biblical instruction or precedence for Christmas. As a matter of fact, you won't even find the word Christmas in your Bible. So the big question is, why are we celebrating it? I'm going to mention it later as well, but I may as well mention it now, that the Puritans were a group in England who, were going right back to the Bible. So they were around about the 17th century. Probably the most famous Puritan is Oliver Cromwell. In my opinion, a hero of the nation, the greatest son of the nation. A lot of people may contest. I think what he did, he had to do at the time. But anyway, that's a different story as well. But the Puritans, they went right back to the Bible. They went right back to the source. And they really wanted to live a life pleasing to God. Now, in New England, the Puritans outlawed Christmas celebration in the 17th century. So for some part of it, not all of it, probably they couldn't hold it up. And bearing in mind, this initially the majority were probably Puritans, but as time went on, a lot of other immigrants of different religious backgrounds arrived, and it was probably hard to impose a ban on Christmas celebrations. But anyway, they couldn't find any precedents in the Bible. They couldn't see, what has Christmas got to do? And they understood that the origins of Christmas were actually pagan. A lot of practices which we, have as common for Christmas are of pagan origin. And they understood this, and so they decided, right, that's it, we're not going to celebrate it. There are other groups as well who don't celebrate Christmas birthdays and stuff like that. I don't agree with these groups on many things. Jehovah's Witnesses, they don't celebrate Christmas and birthdays either. I think some other religious groups are similar. I'm not quite sure whether it's wise or good to go to such an extreme. But again, just to make the point, the Puritans understood. They were quite close to the Bible, and their whole endeavor in life was to live a life pleasing to God based on what the Bible says. Christmas was outlawed in the 17th century in New England by the Puritans. So crazy, huh? The story, let's have a look at the Christmas story. And we've got Isaiah chapter 7, verse 13 and the following verses. And it says, "A virgin will give birth to a son, and his name shall be Emmanuel." And it's just a little insert, somebody asked for a sign, and now the sign will be given. And then Isaiah carries on, then a virgin will give birth to a son, his name shall be Emmanuel. And obviously, how can a virgin give birth to a son? That's impossible. But then we've got the birth of Christ, where Christ was born of God, not of Joseph. A very, very important thing. So if you doubt this, or if you don't accept this, then the whole message of the New Testament, the whole theology falls over. You may as well, give up on Christianity and prepare yourself for hell. Anyway, a virgin will give birth to a son, and his name is Emmanuel, and Emmanuel means God with us. Yeah, so it's interesting verse as well. So you get all these Christmas songs, about Emmanuel and so on. And it means God with us, and that is God become man and being amongst us. And that's what we have in Jesus Christ. In Matthew, we've got chapters 1 and 2, where it talks about the Christmas story, and it starts off with the genealogy. It's very important. We've got two genealogies in the Bible. One is the genealogy of Joseph, the other one of Mary. Of Joseph, because Jesus was Joseph as difficult word there. Joseph's legal son, even though not his natural son, but he was his legal son. So it was important that the legal line The lineage was there. So we've got the genealogy of Joseph, and then we've also got the genealogy of Mary. And of course, we need to know that this is right as well. Why? Because a prophecy or the Bible says that Jesus will be a son of David, King David, that he will be in the lineage of King David. And that's the important thing, so that this prophecy is fulfilled and is shown in the Gospels. We've got the supernatural birth of Christ. Mary is, pregnant by the Holy Spirit, and Jesus is born. And then we found the story of the wise men coming from the east to find Jesus. And here it's interesting. They don't find him in a manger. They find him in a house. Yeah. So it seems to suggest that when Joseph and Mary came down, Jesus was born. The Magi came. Maybe he was already, sometime after the birth. But anyway, it seems that Joseph and Mary have settled down in Bethlehem, rather than in Galilee, where they came from. We got the story. We don't know whether it was three. It's assumed that there were three wise men or kings, or in the text it says Magi. Magi means there were sort of learned people from Persia. And it's only assumed because they brought three gifts, that each one of them brought one gift. All we know is there were just a bunch of people. The rest is all story, which is made up. But not in a manger, in a house. So it was sometime after the birth, from what we can deduct, when we look at the text. So it's interesting as well that when we look at the nativity stories, that things sort of go a little bit strange, and we get like Jesus is born, Mary is still in labor, in post-labor pain, and suddenly it gets really busy. We get the shepherds, and we get the Magi, and then we get other bits as well. Now, we've got the slaying of the children, where Herod was slaying all the children 2 years and younger. And this is when he inquired from the Magi when the star appeared. And again, this seems to suggest that Jesus might have been somewhat older, not necessarily a newly born baby, but that he was a little bit older, and that they were living in a house. They fled to Egypt. Joseph fled to Egypt, and to escape the slaughter, being warned in a dream, and then later on when Herod died, he went back to Nazareth, and he lived back in Galilee, and so he was brought up in Nazareth, in the north, in Galilee, it being under a different jurisdiction. Okay, then we've got Luke. So we've got Luke chapters 1 to 3. Starts off with the birth of John, which is Jesus' cousin, and later we've got John the Baptist, and we've got all the stories around him. We've got the miraculous birth, with the high priest, Zacharias, going into the temple, having an angelic experience. And then he doesn't believe it, so he comes dumb out of the... He comes mute out of the temple. Then, Elizabeth becomes pregnant. John is born, and he gets his speech back when he was circumcised. Then we've got the angelic announcement of the birth of Christ to Mary. So Gabriel comes, tells Mary what's going to take place. She just goes along with it. Then we've got the encounter where both of them are pregnant, of Mary and Elizabeth. Where they come, and then we've got the song of Mary, and we've got the Elizabeth saying, the mother of my Lord, and that she feels her baby leap for joy, and so on. So there's quite a lot of stuff going on there in Luke. Then we've got the census, and where everybody has got to come to be registered in the town of their ancestors. So Mary and Joseph had to go to Bethlehem because Joseph was... from an ancestor of David. That's where they were from, where the family was from. And because of the census, there was probably a lot of people moving around. There was no room anywhere, so they couldn't find anywhere where to stay. So they were in a stable, and basically it was just sort of a compound which was protected, where animals were kept at night. So it was a little bit safer, sort of a walled compound. And that, it seems, where they would have stayed overnight. Then we've got Jesus is wrapped up, is put in a manger. Then we've got the shepherds sleeping on the field. And here, straight away, we've got a problem as well with the dates. Now, in December, it's quite cold in Jerusalem. The temperatures are, it tends to be wet and rainy, and the temperatures tend to be rather down. So we're looking at maybe, in the moment I checked it out, we've got 10 degrees, but apparently sometimes it can snow at this time of the year as well. So it's unlikely that they would have been sleeping on the field in December the 25th. It's more likely that they were just, crashing out on the field sometime in summertime or spring or autumn time. And anyway, then we've got the angelic choir. The shepherds get all freaked out. They see what's going on, so they go and see the child. The sign is that they find a child wrapped in a manger, and there's this big revelation. Then we've got Jesus presented in the temple for circumcision, and we've got the prophecy of Simeon and Anna, who kind of confirmed that this child is special and there's something about it. And then we've got the genealogy of Christ, again, looking back and making sure that he is an ancestor of David. So that's really what we've got in Luke, and that's all we've got about the Christmas story. We've got one more reference in the Gospel of John, and there are 2 verses in there which kind of, stretching it a little bit, refer to the birth of Christ. And we've got, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we beheld his glory, the glory as of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth. So that's really the key thing. We've got God, who was a Word, who became flesh and dwelt among us. And obviously the point of God becoming flesh is the Christmas story. And that's really the greatest news. God is here. He's come among us. He's with us. And he's one of us. And obviously more importantly, he's prepared a way for us. He's taken the punishment which we deserve upon himself. And that's really what the key, the key to the story is, really. Okay, what was the most likely date of the birth of Christ? Was it the 24th or 25th of December? 24th, because in Germany it's, the Christmas night, so he was born somewhere at night on the 24th. That's a German tradition. The Roman tradition, it's more the 25th of December, and it's 25th is more picked up in the Anglo-Saxon area, so the English-speaking world. So we've got it in England and in America. No, it's unlikely, and there are a couple of reasons. First of all, the census would probably not have taken place in the 24th or 25th of December. The reason is it's quite cold. It's not very good to travel. The governor made the decision to send the people to be counted to the place where their lineage is from. Makes sense as well from a Jewish point of view to, it's a very strong emphasis about the heritage and the genealogy. So it makes sense for them to send them there. So it's unlikely that the census would take place. Number one, it's sowing time, when they work the fields, to sow the fields, harvest time. Unlikely that the census would take place in there because obviously if there's a problem with the harvest, the Romans shoot themselves in the foot because they want to collect taxes, and the whole census is for the purpose of taxation. So they need to find a way to do it at a time where people can travel easily, where they don't get caught up in bad weather as they travel, and bearing in mind they don't have cars or anything. So weather is quite important as you travel. And also, they don't want to impact a harvest and the time when the fields are prepared for sowing. Harvest and seed time, really. So the times which are left are really springtime and sometime in autumn. And that's what, when you look at scholars who look at the text and who look at other secondary evidence, what they think happened, that it was sometime in September or sometime maybe April or so. Okay, we have got the shepherds sleeping on the field, yeah. And again, it doesn't make sense for them to do it in winter time. It would just be too cold. Yeah, at the moment in Jerusalem, we've got temperatures of about 10 degrees. At night, probably dropping down a bit, and it's a bit nippy if you sleep outside at 10 degrees. So it's more likely that they would have gone somewhere inside to get some shelter to sleep there than outside in the open. More likely that they would do it in springtime or summertime or autumn time. The next thing is there's no official record of the date of his birth. Nobody really knows. So the only things we can go by is the census data, when the census took place, and a little bit with all the evidence we've got in the scriptures itself, which is pretty much only that the shepherds were sleeping on the field. The next thing is Christians in the first centuries did not celebrate Christmas at all, so that's a problem. So a lot of traditions which might have been picked up early on, for example, the first century or so, when people who knew Jesus were still alive, it would have been possible to ascertain his exact date of birth a lot easier than later, than literally 400 years later when it was not there. But for the Christians in the first 3 centuries, the whole Christmas event wasn't really relevant at all. Yes, it was a story. It was there. It was important to know about Jesus' origins, especially in the light of prophecies in the Bible, and that's the reason why it's been mentioned. But we don't really find any intricate information about this. Okay, suggestions are made for springtime or autumn and fall times. Outside harvest times, warm enough for people to sleep outside. Yeah, so they are the two sort of indicators to try and get the dating right. And with that, it's very unlikely that it was either the 24th or 25th of December. Okay, what do we have at the 24th, 25th of September? We have got Saturnalia, which is a festival, a Roman festival, and it's a god of agriculture. Yeah, obviously, shortest day in the year. Sun is very important for agriculture. Nothing grows without the sun. The sun comes back on the, around about this time, 21st, maybe 25th, depending on how far we've shifted in the year. And so we've got the Roman feast of Saturnalia. Yeah, let's look what they were doing. So it was started at about the 17th of December and went to the 23rd of December. Some people say it went to the 25th of December. It was a time of gift giving, so you can see the relevance. They were giving gifts at Saturnalia. Obviously, God gave us the greatest gift to mankind. That's normally the Christian interpretation, and therefore we give gifts to one another because God has given us a gift of Jesus Christ, which, true enough, is the greatest gift we can ever imagine. Jesus Christ is the most important gift, the most important. I don't want to use the word thing, but it's the most important event, what has happened in history and what has happened to mankind. No Jesus, no eternity with God, no fellowship with God. No Jesus, hell is your destiny. Yeah, that's really what we are talking about. So it truly is the greatest gift without any doubt God has given us. Obviously, maybe Christians in the 4th century they felt similar way that Saturnalia and giving of gifts, and then God giving us gifts, the greatest gift ever, yeah, Himself. That might be a nice thing. Now, there was a big thing about candles as well. I mean, dark periods, even when you go to the Mediterranean, it gets all a bit grim around about this time. So people had a lot of candles and so on around. So that was, big thing about Saturnalia. There was an inversion of the social order. So the masters became servants, and so they were waiting on their slaves, and the slaves became masters, for this short period of time. Not quite sure how this fits in with Christmas. I know with in the Anglo-Saxon area, you've got like little crowns people put up on Christmas to be kings. Again, the Christian thing is, the 3 kings of the East came. They weren't kings; they were magi. They were. That's the first sort of inaccuracy. Maybe it comes from Saturnalia as well, with the inversion of the social order. That's, for a few days you are the king, and so on. I'm not sure. Anyway, there was a human sacrifice at the temple of Saturn. Right at the end of the time, so somebody was selected. That person was selected on the 17th, and then they were feeding that person with everything, treating, like a fattened goose. They were feeding that person, and then on the 23rd, he was going to be executed as a sacrifice to Saturn, to the god of Saturn, at the temple of Saturn. Pretty grim. Anyway, what people used to do is and you can still find them in bakeries in Germany and in England as well. I'm not sure about America. The gingerbread man, that's basically cookies which were made in the form of man, and they were pointing to the human sacrifice which would happen at the end of the feast of Saturnalia. That was pretty much the climax, where a human was sacrificed to the god of Saturn, and cookies was given to children, to commemorate or to celebrate the human sacrifice. There was a lot of indulgence going on, so that was a big thing. People were eating lots. They were, preparing for the festivities. It was like a big long orgy, lasting for quite some time, and it was all about indulgence. Sounds similar? I think it does. There was a lot of licentiousness, so sexual immorality was rife. The mistletoe thing comes from the Roman times, and the courts were closed as well, and sort of misdemeanors taking place during this time were not prosecuted in court. So it was a time of liberalism, of do what you want, be easy. Society being totally unhinged. Again, it sounds maybe familiar. Okay, and what else were they doing? And it gets quite interesting. People were running around the streets, singing naked in the streets. Fortunately, in Europe, it's not possible, with the temperatures plummeting down rather steeply at around about Christmas time. But people were singing naked in the streets. This is absolutely crazy. But again, you've got Christmas carols where people go around and they sing Christmas carols. It's the same concept which comes right back from Saturnalia. It's there are a lot of other things going on as well, and it's one of those traditions which come to us right from the 4th century, possibly even before that, when you look at Saturnalia. So it was taken over in Christmas, and it went over. Law courts were closed, and that was, you couldn't persecute or prosecute somebody for going a little bit crazy. So people were encouraged to just, let their hair down and go crazy. People were taking evergreens into the house, so they were looking at trees, like pine trees or anything like that. So they would take them into the house, and that's maybe where we get the Christmas tree from. There were also a lot of German practices, and what we have to find when we look at Christmas is that there's a merging of cults which were practiced by the German tribes and cults which were practiced by the Romans as well. So there was a little bit of everything going in there, and that was all happening at Saturnalia. We've got one more. We've got the mistletoe. All comes from that time. And we got the human-shaped cookies, the gingerbread man, and we've still got it in Germany, and I think in England as well. And then the other thing which was quite interesting, and I just latched onto this, was that poems were quite big during that time. So people were composing poems for one another, and that could be like Christmas cards or what we have today. So there's just a little bit of an analogy between what was happening in Roman days and what's happening today. So a lot of similarity, and this is actually quite, in a way, it's quite disturbing, because Saturnalia is clearly a pagan feast. It's got nothing to do with Christianity. The Christians in the first 3 centuries, under persecution, they weren't celebrating Christmas at all. It wasn't a feast, it wasn't a festival as such. And only when Christianity became the state religion in the Roman Empire, the official religion in the Roman Empire, then suddenly these Saturnalia festivities entered into Christianity. under a different guise. So what are we celebrating? This is a big question. What are we celebrating? Are we really celebrating Christ, or are we celebrating something else? And now the point I want to make to you is that we are celebrating something else. Now, Christmas tree has got nothing to do with a biblical understanding of Christianity. The gift giving, candles, gingerbread man. I mean, it's really bad when you think about it. When you look at this, that this was a celebration of human sacrifice. Then indulges, like the whole mistletoe thing, to kiss some stranger under the mistletoe because it gives you the license to do it. I mean, it's just crazy. Even the carol singing, which seems to be all nice and innocent and stuff like that, but originally it was just a bunch of people roaming the streets naked, singing songs. Now, in the Mediterranean, it might have been possible. Fortunately, in our latitudes, it gets a little bit too cold for that. But this is what was happening. What else have we got? We've got on the 25th of December, there's another festivity, and some people say that maybe that's where the 25th comes from, and this is Sol Invictus, the unconquerable sun. Yeah, so because the sun returns, the days become longer, so they called it Sol Invictus. Yeah. And the sun was the god of the soldiers. It was found on Roman coins, and you can see a couple of coins here. There's one coin here. You've got the sun worship as well, where you've got the sun god. And some people say that it actually comes from an Egyptian cult, so that it got roots in Horus and Ra, where we've got, part of the sun worship as well. And again, that's Sol Invictus, some festivities around there as well. So some suggestions are there that this was a choice for the date. Yeah. Again, there's a nice parallel, Christ, the light of the world. He's unconquerable. He conquered death. Maybe there is a parallel. I don't know. Maybe that's the reason for the choice of the date. But certainly there were pagan festivals about that time. And then we've got the Mithras cult as well. Now, the Mithras cult was a cult of mysteries. And again, it was celebrated on the 25th of December. It's of Persian origin. And by the way, the date is contested. So some people say, no, it was really on a different date. It's secret religion, and it was popular in the first 4 centuries, and then it sort of died to death, really. But it was quite exclusive as well, so you had to be initiated and become a member of this cult and so on. So that was in the Roman Empire. It became quite popular in the first 4 centuries, and then kind of disappeared. Again, 25th of December was suggested that it comes from. Now let's have a look at the Santa story. And Santa, Santa Claus, Nicholas, the actual date of his, I think it's when he died, was the 6th of December. And that was in 345 AD. That's when he died. He became a bishop of Myra, which today is in Turkey. And he was born in 270. Yeah. So he was born still under the time of persecution. He apparently was quite a pious guy, and he became a bishop quite early in life, quite as a young man. There are a couple of stories around him. Yeah. One story goes, and again, they are all just stories. Nobody really knows. Are they true? Are they not true? What are we really celebrating? Why is this guy so famous? There's a story about a famine in some areas, and it goes really bizarre. The story. The story goes as far that one guy, he captured a few children, and there was a big famine. A butcher, he captured children, he slaughtered them or killed them, and he was intending to, cut them up and sell them as bacon or something. Anyway, the story goes that Nicholas went there, and when he saw the dead children, or he found the dead children, and he raised them back to death, he prayed, and the children came back to life again. Yeah, that's one story which goes around. Whether this is true or not, I don't know. Is it possible? Does God perform miracles? Do the dead get raised? And my answer is yeah. Miracles still happen today. They happen throughout church history. God is the same today, yesterday and tomorrow as well. Yeah. And so I wouldn't sort of write it off, but we don't know. Yeah. The other thing was that he was giving gifts to children, like food gifts to children during a famine. So he put some food in a sock or something. That was the story, or in shoes, and he left them for children. You know, and children could then have something to eat during this famine. So that's one story which took place. The other one is he just gave little gifts to children. So when he was obviously a Christian bishop, so he went from church to church to make sure that the churches he was looking after were all okay. On his travels, he was renowned to give gifts to children, and that's where his fame comes from. Yeah, I mentioned before he prayed for and resurrected children to life, which were murdered in a famine where a butcher tried to, cut them up and sell them as meat. There's also another story which is quite interesting, and who knows, they might all be true, that he was on a ship and the ship got into bad weather, and bearing in mind in those days it was all by wind power. He didn't have motors where you could just try and navigate out of the storm or something. It was in bad weather, and like Jesus, he silenced the storm on a ship, so he just rebuked the storm, and everything got silent. Yeah. So that's a story which has gone around as well about Nicholas. And again, it kind of fits all together. I mean, the guy was a traveling guy, so he would have been on ships, he would have been going to different churches. Maybe it's true. There's another story as well, which talks about that he helped out a poor man. He had 3 daughters, and he could not afford a dowry. Yeah, and in those days, if he could not afford a dowry, and women didn't get married, they were pretty much doomed to economic misery, either begging or whatever. And it was quite important. It was quite a big thing. So what he was doing is he was secretly slipping 3 purses with gold coins through the window, so that each of his daughters could have a dowry. Yeah, so he, knowing that the guy wouldn't accept the offer directly, he wouldn't accept any arms or anything like that. So he just slipped him secretly through a window into his house, and then he had a dowry for 3 daughters, so they could get married. Just one story. He celebrated on the 6th of December. The Julian calendar would be about, I think, 9 days later, 19th of December or something, or 9 days would be the 15th of December. In the Orthodox Church, in the Gregorian calendar, it's on the 6th of December. Yeah, and that's really where Santa comes from. So that's the guy originally, who was Santa. So what's happened during sort of the Catholic era and other eras was that, and I remember this as well, that on the 6th of December you got like a small parcel with or stockings, where you had some sweets and stuff like that, and that was a celebration of Saint Nicholas. Yeah. And it wasn't really on the 25th, and somehow, because he gave gifts and things like that, it was all merged onto the 25th, that it was no longer, we're going to give you gifts because of Christ, and God has given us this great gift to mankind, but it's Santa who is coming to give you gifts. Yeah. And again, it's all a little bit sort of merged together, changed over time, and we've now got this big Santa thing, and you see Santas all over the place. Again, there's no biblical precedence. There's just a guy, by all we can tell, this guy Nicholas, or Saint Nicholas. We don't know whether all the stories are true, whether he actually resurrected people, whether he calmed a storm through rebuking it, whether he gave gifts to children, whether he sorted out a famine, whether he silenced a storm on a ship, whether he helped out a poor man who had 3 daughters who needed a dowry. We don't know, but they might be possible. By all intents and purposes, all we can tell is he was probably a very good guy. He was given to Christ. He was, as he was going through the churches and supporting them, it sounds like he was the sort of guy, if there was a need, he would try to meet this need. If he could bring joy to somebody by giving him little gifts, he was bringing joy to somebody. He loved children, and so if he saw some children, he always had some cookies or something by the sounds of it, yeah, and he would just give it to them. So this is Saint Nicholas, and this is where we get the Santa story from. Okay, let's have a look what the Bad Santa is all about, and this is where the whole Santa cult and the whole idea of Santa and his reindeer and a sledge and stuff like that. No, one thing we can say pretty safely is that Saint Nicholas wasn't traveling with reindeer and a sledge. He was in Turkey, and even in winter time you might get a little bit of snow, but it's unlikely that people travel on a sledge in Turkey. Yeah. I haven't seen anything like it. I doubt whether he did. No, the Nicholas cult spread north until it was adopted by German and Celtic pagans. And these groups worshipped a pantheon led by Wodan, or Woden, and their chief god and the father of Thor, Balder, and Teve. Now, Wodan had a long white beard, and he rode a horse through the heavens one evening each autumn. Does it sound familiar? So he was riding on a horse through heaven on one evening in autumn. And if you looked up, you might see Wodan. When Nicholas merged with Wodan, he shed his Mediterranean appearance, grew a beard, mounted a flying horse, and rescheduled his flight for December, and donned heavy winter clothing. So this is, where suddenly Santa and Wodan come together, and we've got this guy riding through the sky. Yeah. And where do we get the modern Santa with red attire and stuff like that? Now, in 1931, the Coca-Cola Corporation contracted the Swedish commercial artist Haden Sundblom to create a Coke-drinking Santa. Sundblom molded his Santa on his friend Lou Prentice, chosen for his cheerful, chubby face. The corporation insisted that Santa's fur-trimmed suit be bright Coca-Cola red. And Santa was born, a blend of a Christian crusader, pagan god, and commercial idol. So that's where we get modern Santa. We've got the red attire, the Coca-Cola. We've got the beard of Wodan. We've got somebody riding through the sky like Wodan, and we get this very strange mix, which has got very little to do with Christianity. The big question is, what are we going to do as Christians? I mean, I think it's important that we need to understand where all this stuff comes from. Yeah, I tell you what kind of strikes me as quite disturbing, and this is when you get like a nativity scene. The second commandment says that we shouldn't have any graven image, of anything really, and yet we've got graven images of little baby Jesus, in the nativity scene, and I think it's a clear contravention against the second commandment. I might be a little bit legalistic here, and I wouldn't go and sort of smash nativity scenes or anything like that, but I wouldn't have one myself. I would just avoid it. I wouldn't have a nativity scene in my house. If I had kids, I wouldn't have my kids, or encourage them to go down this way. What are we doing? Are we, doing what the Jehovah's Witnesses are doing and just say Christmas is over, it's no more Christmas, or what the Puritans did? And again, I've got greatest respect for the Puritans. They're sort of my heroes of the 17th century. There's no question about it. And but should we do what the Puritans did and just outlaw Christmas? And my answer is I don't know. Yeah. Romans 14 has got a very interesting perspective on this, and Paul says one person esteems one day above another esteems every day alike. Let each be fully convinced in his own mind. He who observes the day observes it to the Lord, and he who does not observe the day to the Lord, he does not observe it. Basically what Paul is saying here is it doesn't really matter. You can have, consider some days holier than others. You can observe certain days, do certain things, do it to the Lord. Yeah, and I think that's the important thing. If you're not doing it, don't do it to the Lord, or do it not to the Lord. And what point am I making here? I think what we should do as Christians is we should, number one, is understand where it's all coming from. Separate ourselves from the world. I mean, the world has got a very strange idea of Christmas. And we should separate ourselves from that. We should just make a point and maybe emphasize the Christian aspects of this festivities. Jesus Christ being God become flesh, the light of the world. He has come to show us a way. Yeah, it's the greatest gift of God to mankind, and point out why. And that's the reason why I give you a little gift. Maybe the whole St. Nicholas story. I mean, certainly he was a good guy, yeah, and I think it's important to have heroes of faith. And Hebrew talks about the heroes of faith. Yeah, so the Bible talks about them. So I don't think it's a bad thing to look at good Christians and to look what they've done with their lives and use them as role models. And I think St. Nicholas, there's no doubt about it. The little bit of information which has been saved throughout the centuries we have about St. Nicholas, we know that he was a good guy, and we know that he did a lot of good stuff, that he was more interested in the welfare of the people around him than in his own welfare. That he saw a need and he met the need. And that's something good. And I think that's something, when we talk about Santa Claus, that we should go back to the real Nicholas, St. Nicholas, and talk about what this guy really did. And let it be an example to us that we do similar, that we do the same things, and that we help those who are less fortunate. That those who are really struggling, that we try to help them. And maybe the whole gifting thing shouldn't be you give me, I give you, but it should be an aspect of, if you see somebody who is struggling, if you see somebody who really needs some help, to all just chip together and to help that guy, that woman, that widow, that orphan, and to make a difference to their lives. And obviously not just do it on Christmas Day on the 25th, but do it throughout the year. I'm sure St. Nicholas just didn't do it once a year. He did it all the time. He saw a need, he dealt with this. The Wodan story, the reindeers, the Coca-Cola Nicholas or Santa Claus, I don't know. Christmas decorations, I don't know. I think Romans 14, if you do it to the Lord. My choice is I've got a little plastic Christmas tree with fiber optics. I sometimes put it on, I sometimes don't. It's not a big thing to me. I like looking at the fancy lights, how they change. And that's the only thing really what motivates me about that. But that's pretty much about all. And sometimes I've got it up till about Easter time. I put it up and I don't take it down. It's just sort of lighting away. I don't make a big fuss about it. Yeah, I wouldn't. I know some people go really crazy about it, and I heard some preachers saying that because a lot of with the new political correctness thing, a lot of commercial organizations say they no longer have nativity scenes, and I heard one preacher saying that he was going to go a big nativity scene for his garden and stuff like that. And I'm kind of thinking, why? This is just it's not. It's not biblical. It's not what the Bible tells us. Christmas is not a biblical feast as such. It's a pagan feast. The origin is pagan, and we should use the time to just extol and highlight who Jesus Christ really is, and use the opportunity to tell others, what Jesus is all about, and use a bad choice of festivities, of days, of festivals, and make the best of it. I think that's my thinking about Christmas. Okay, I'm going to close this talk on this point. I just want to encourage you to have the Romans 14 approach. Whatever you do it to the Lord. Be aware of where it all comes from. Don't defend Christmas as a Christian thing, and if neo-pagans come and they call it the mid-solstice or the winter solstice or whatever, let them. Ultimately it comes from them anyway. But on the other side, I think use the time and really celebrate, that God has become man, that God came to us, and that the world is seeing a great light. 2,000 years ago, and that we can still experience this light in our hearts if we surrender our lives to Jesus Christ, and if we believe and accept what he has done, if we repent of our ways, change our thinking, change our outlook in life, and seek God with all of our hearts, our mind, and our soul, and our understanding, instead of seeking ourselves or seeking this world or seeking success in this world. So on this note, I want to wish you a Merry Christmas and also a Happy New Year. And know where it's coming from. That's very important. Don't get tied up about it. I would still, celebrate Christmas to some extent. There's no problem with that. But get the right focus on Christmas. I think that's very important. Okay, God bless and bye-bye from Michael at Seismic Radio.